Thank you. So today it's my honor to introduce you to the Chairman and CEO of UPS, David Abney. And since our company, Wayfair, delivers everything we sell one item at a time all over the US, the UK, Canada, and Germany, we understand the real importance of logistics. And so as you can imagine, UPS is a critical partner of ours. UPS delivers 18.3 million packages a day. So you can just think about that scale. UPS has 444,000 people, it has 104,000 vehicles, and it has 651 airplanes. And so in our world, the world of e-commerce, you can just think about how UPS powers e-commerce with everything they do. David joined UPS in 1974. He joined UPS while he was in college as a part-time package loader. And over his career at UPS, he did a number of things. He oversaw a lot of their acquisitions. He was the president of Sonic Air, which was an acquisition UPS made to move into the same-day parts delivery business. He was the president of UPS International. He was the chief operating officer of UPS. And then in 2014, he became the 11th CEO of UPS. Now, as I mentioned to David last night over dinner, you know, our UPS driver, Charlie, is actually a real rock star at our house. So my kids, they're 9 and 11, and so what they've really started to enjoy is really the consumer end of e-commerce. And so, for those of you who have young children, you pretty much know where this story's headed. And so, you can imagine their joy when Charlie arrives, and it's this type of fun of seeing a brown truck pull up to the house. And now you can imagine for me how difficult this is, as I tend to arrive home shortly after Charlie has left, and my arrival is not quite as exciting. And so, ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor to introduce you to the man in charge of these vehicles of joy, Mr. David Abney.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Well, good afternoon. And I appreciate that introduction. And you would not believe the number of stories that I hear about UPS drivers all over the world. And they really are our ambassadors for our company. When you think of UPS, you do not think of me. You think of the drivers that deliver your packages throughout the world. So thank you for that introduction. I really appreciate it. And as you can tell, I'm from south of Boston, right? So I don't think that qualifies me as a Southie, but I'm about 1,000 miles south. About the first sentence, you noticed that, I understand that. But really, I'm glad to be here. Boston is really one of the cities that I really love to visit, whether it's vacations or business trips, meeting with investors, meeting with customers. And it's also the place, the city that I was first announced as the CEO of UPS. Unfortunately, at the time, I wasn't quite the CEO of UPS. I was still the COO, and we were doing a healthcare forum here. And we actually did it the day that Scott Davis, who I took his place, we were going to make the announcement that night internally, the next morning externally. So we have all this planned. We come here for Boston, and when the moderator introduces me, instead of saying COO, he says CEO. And this is supposed to be the best kept secret in the world, right? So I knew I hadn't said anything, so I'm looking at Scott like, well, you couldn't keep your mouth quiet. Scott's looking at me on who did you tell? And so it was just prematurely announced about 6 hours before. But we did get a chance to come see Ron and Sargent with Staples. And it was really my first CEO to CEO discussion. And Ron, I appreciate the suggestions and the comments you had at that time. And obviously appreciate your business too. And so obviously I have fond memories of Boston, but I also have fond memories of this company that when I joined, when I was 18 years old, I really didn't know what they did. I just knew I needed a job to get through college, right? And so I started. Now you hear people say that they started at the bottom. I started at the bottom. And people say, so you must have been a driver. I go, no. I had to get promoted to become a driver. I was the one that loaded the packages when the drivers came in at the end of the day. I wanted to be a history teacher or a history professor. That was my goal. But about a year in, I had this manager, and this happens all the time in our company. He puts his arm around me, tells me how important the company is, tells me the opportunities, and then starts telling me what he has seen in me that would make the ensured to him that I would be an important part of this company. Now, I don't know if he really saw anything or if he said that to every 19-year-old. I'm sure now he takes full credit for being able to read the future, right? But that was the start of an incredible journey. And I just feel fortunate every day that I get to represent, and we've got quite a few UPSers here on the left side of the room. I'm just honored that I get to represent the 440,000 UPSers around the world. So if we could recognize them, maybe if you'll stand up, let people know who you are. So we started as a company in 1907, so we're 109 years old, in Seattle, and we were a messenger company. And messenger business 109 years ago was a pretty good business. And then something happened. The telephone was invented, right? Once you have the telephone, you really don't need messengers going across the city. So that was the first time that we had to change our business. And then we started delivering packages from retail customers to their homes, and this is in the 1920s. This is when people didn't have cars and they needed a way to get their packages home. And then in World War II, and people started getting cars, regional shopping centers came up. Again, we had to change our business because now people were just taking their packages and putting them in their cars. And so then we went into the common carrier business, which just means we'd move packages from any point to any point. But that was all ground packages. And when I started in 1974, I had to memorize zip codes in the U.S. that we could not go to. We didn't have the license to go to. And now, of course, we're in 220 countries and territories around the world. And we're not only in the ground business, but the air business, of course, ocean. And we transformed again from a package delivery company to a logistics company. And now I have to tell you that we really consider ourselves a technology company. Because to compete in this world, because one thing we all have in common, there is probably somewhere out there, maybe in their house, maybe in their garage, somebody's thinking of ways that they can replace many of our businesses right now. And so we have realized we have two choices. We either embrace change, embrace technology, embrace the trends that we face, or someone's going to do it for us. And their goal won't be quite as honorable as ours, right? Our goal is to make sure we continue to grow this company and leave it for the next generation of UPSers even stronger. Their goal, replacing us, doesn't sound so good for us. So we really focus on that. You know, one of the things I'm going to talk about today is this globally connected world that we live in. It's more connected than ever before. Starting to sound like my parents, I think, but really it's the case. And in that world, you just have to adjust to things differently. And I'll give you an example. Last week I'm in Seattle. Our district there, I was given them an award for having the best district in the entire United States. And so they've got a group of about 20 leaders, And I present the award to them. And one of them had a phone that they used to record the presentation. And they put it on Periscope, which is an app that you can just download onto your phone. And it's just live transmission of video. See, in the past, we would have had a meeting like that. We would have taken pictures. Then we would have talked about how we were going to communicate this. And within a few days, we'd have had a real nice piece, right, with pictures. And within a week of the event, it would have gone out. Now, it's within minutes. In fact, I'm convinced you can't even finish most of your talks before it's already out there, right? And in this case, we were doing it, so we had a little control. In many cases, you don't even know that it's occurring. So people are going to communicate for you. What we have found the best thing to do is communicate for ourselves and have to do it very quickly, which means maybe you can't construct it as carefully as you would like and be as detailed and have it as proper as you would like. But this world, there's always someone communicating, and there's always connectivity. And the things that I wanted to spend some time on today is talking about 3 realities of this connected world that is facing most everyone in this room. And then I'm going to talk about an imperative that I think needs to occur. And not everyone's going to agree with me, but I was given the honor of getting to have the podium for a few minutes, so I'll take advantage of that, right? But the first reality that many of us are facing is emerging markets and what's going on in some of these places. Now, you always think about China, and China, there's incredible things happening there. But it's much more than China. You know, it's India, it's Vietnam, it's Indonesia, can be Brazil. They've just got to get through some of the troubles that they're going through. But there's other countries too, the Philippines. You could just go on and on. That these middle classes are growing. They're growing rapidly. In fact, McKinsey says by the year 2025, seems like a long time from now, but it's not. 2025, the consumption in those emerging markets is going to be $30 trillion. And when you think about that, I'm just wanting to make sure I get that number exactly right. After I said it, I'm starting to doubt myself, but it was $30 trillion. Also, within the next 15 years, predictions are that 75% of the increase in global GDP is of the growth in GDP, so the increase is going to occur in these countries. So we can spend a lot of time worrying about that. A lot of people do. We can spend time thinking about how we're going to prevent it, or we can look at it as what an opportunity for U.S. businesses to hit those markets and to be a player in those markets. And so if these predictions come true, either one of them, if they come true, that will be the biggest economic gain since capitalism has been invented. There has never in the history of the world been that kind of growth, economic growth. So it's a huge opportunity. And the consumer in those countries, growing middle classes. In China alone, the middle class is about the size of the U.S. population right now. And just think about this middle class, how it's going to grow. They want many of the same things that you and I want, the services and the products of the world that we have experienced. And again, it creates an opportunity, but those opportunities are across borders. And it's something that we have to be willing to embrace. So a second reality, and I'm speaking to the choir for some of the people in this room, but a second reality is the effect that e-commerce is having on our lives and on most of our businesses throughout the world. There was a time at UPS that 85% of our deliveries would occur business to businesses. So we would deliver 30 or 40 packages to different retail stops. 10, 15, maybe a little more % of our business went to residentials. Now it's close to 50% residentials. And during December of last year, we set an all-time record. It was mid-60s. Now, it doesn't mean that e-commerce is going to replace all business. In fact, obviously, brick and mortar retail is still about 90% of retail sales. But it's just the fast pace that these businesses are growing. In 2015, online retail in the United States grew at a little over 11% compared to brick and mortar, which was pretty much flat, a little bit of an increase. In fact, there's, again, some statistics that talk about opportunities that in the domestic U.S., through the rest of this decade, that e-commerce sales is going to grow at 5 times GDP. Cross-border e-commerce is predicted to grow at 8 times GDP. So think about that for a moment. If you're looking for a market, if you're looking for an opportunity for your business, if you can find one that's growing 5 or 8 times GDP, that's a pretty good opportunity there. And that's what we're seeing. And for the first time ever in 2015, more than half of retail sales occurred in Asia. And normally you would think the U.S. and you would think of Western Europe. But Asia had more than half of retail sales last year. And again, that's applying a lot to the emerging markets. And so I've talked about how this trend has affected our business. But what it's also caused us to do is to adjust our network and look at making the changes that we needed to make in our company. See, it's very easy to compare the pace of change that you're doing to previous years, and you can feel pretty good. When it comes to e-commerce, we started measuring ourselves against the pace of change that was occurring in e-commerce, and we realized we could fall behind pretty quickly. And we knew there'd be people that were trying to make up that difference. So when it comes to us, it's making sure that we implement customer products and services that target that industry. Things like UPS My Choice, which gives the consumer control of the delivery, or access points where you can actually have alternate delivery points. But it's things that we can utilize technology addressing this e-commerce business to keep up with the demand that's out there. Third reality that I want to talk about, and again, it ties pretty much to the second one, and I started tiptoeing into the topic, so I was trying to pull back, but that's technology and the amazing pace of technology, the speed of how technology is changing our world. Again, I'm starting to sound old, I'm sure, but there's more change, more innovative technology occurring today, obviously, than ever before. Give you a small little tidbit. And since I've been talking this afternoon, there has been more digital information created in the world than was created from the beginning of this world until 2010. Just think about that for a minute. And I haven't been talking that long, right? But that's what's going on. So there's opportunities there that we can take advantage of. But there's also opportunities for someone else to use that same technology and take advantage of us. Give you an example of technology. Many of you, I'm sure, have the Apple Watch. And the Apple Watch today has twice the memory and twice the speed of the Cray 2 supercomputer that was rolled out in 1985. It's a little bit lighter too, so if you want to go somewhere, if you buckled up to the Cray supercomputer, you weren't going anywhere, right? But that just shows you how much change that there is in the world, and it will continue. And I'm not just talking about bits and bytes too. That's an important part of this. But whether it's robotics or nanotechnology or biogenetics, there's just all kinds of ways that technology is being applied to our world. So I'll talk about a couple of Boston examples. And they're both customers of ours. Surprise, right? That the CEO of UPS is going to talk about UPS customers. But one is a small startup called Jibo. And Jibo makes what they call the first family robot. And this robot will do various things around the house. But what I found it interesting is that they've actually programmed this robot to laugh at your jokes. Sometimes I would need that, right? And but that's just an example, and it's predicted that in the next 4 years that 1 in 10 households will have a robot, and probably a few years after that, there'll probably be very few that won't. That's just one of the changes. Another one that Niraj and I talked about last night, I had to pull this out of him. It wasn't like he was bragging. I had to ask questions. But I had read about, they'd just done a press release where they can take a product, and let's say that there is a lamp or something that you're interested in buying, but you don't know how it fits in your house. Well, with the new phone technologies coming out with multiple cameras, you would be able to get a picture of that lamp, then go to your house and just use your camera and just position the lamp where it would be in all parts of the room. I guess to see if it fits with everything else, or if it is the right size. All these things that my wife clearly understands, that I'm blind to. But just think about, there again, it's just another enabler, right, of e-commerce. And those kinds of technologies are just going to continue and continue to exist. And it's just going to create challenges, but it's going to create opportunities. So trying to watch close my watch, because I've told you guys have a firm departure time, right? But and I do want to leave time for questions, because that's where I learn the most. So I want to quit talking about realities for a minute and talk about this imperative that I referred to. And I strongly believe that we've got to align trading rules, we've got to align trade agreements with the realities that we face. I am going to use a Boston example. You probably hear it from outside speakers all the time. But I really believe the last time we've seen so much disalignment between trading rules and between reality was the Boston Tea Party of many, many years ago. That's how misaligned I believe that we are right now, to our competitive disadvantage. And now I will admit, if you watch any of the presidential debates, trade is not getting a lot of love these days, right? In fact, it's getting just the opposite, to the point that my wife no longer watches presidential debates with me. You know, I can tolerate a lot of things, but when I start hearing talk about trade and I just hear one aspect of it, the fear side, and I don't hear about the opportunities and the importance of it, I get a little excited. And because I know there's a lot of potential here. And I'll talk about a few of those things when I talk about this imperative. But, and there are challenges that need to be addressed, you know. Does globalization cause some jobs to get displaced? I would say absolutely. Not near the percent that gets credited for it, right? There's a lot of productivity and technology advancements that are eliminating jobs. But trade certainly can, and we need to do things for those people. We need to help make sure that they are prepared for this changing world and get them trained and give them the skills that they need to compete. But to believe that we would use that as a reason to pull back from the world when 95% of the world's consumers live outside the U.S. So are we honestly wanting to pull back from 95% of the market for many of our businesses in this room? It just doesn't seem logical to me. The other thing that I want you to know is that, and I'm not speaking just for UPS, so yes, when we do a free trade agreement in the U.S., We see exports out of the U.S. in our network grow by 20%. Average growth of 20% as soon as there's a trade agreement signed. So is it good for us? It absolutely is. But it's good for our customers because they're the ones that's driving the 20%, right? It's not us. Free trade agreements just don't automatically generate packages. But when people have access to markets and when barriers are removed and when restrictions are harmonized, then all of a sudden, and businesses can have market access to places that they never could before. That creates real opportunity. Also, every 22 packages that crosses the U.S. border, export, import, doesn't matter, every 22 packages, that creates a UPS job. So you can't tell me that it doesn't create jobs for us, it doesn't create jobs for our customers, because it absolutely does. Now, there is a lot of activity. In spite of the rhetoric that you do hear about trade, and there's concerns, but there's a lot of activity that's going on about trade. In fact, there's all these acronyms, that TTIP, TPP, TISA, Trade Facilitation Agreement. All these agreements are in some form of being negotiated at this time. The one I'm going to talk about for a couple of minutes is TPP. And TPP has been negotiated, and trade ministers from the 12 countries, representing 800 million people, in an area of the world that's growing extremely fast, they did reach agreement in a little town called Atlanta, Georgia. And they reached agreement, and now it's going to be up to the government of those 12 countries to ratify this agreement. But what TPP does do is eliminates a lot of tariffs. It does create market access. And or at least as importantly, it has a chapter devoted to SMEs, small and mid-sized enterprises, which in the United States, an extremely low percentage of small businesses export. Less than 2% of small businesses in this country export. That is dwarfed by Germany and many other countries. Part of the reason is how difficult it is to export, how difficult it is to understand the rules. The IBMs, the Staples, the big companies, they understand these trading rules. But some of these small companies that their entire international department would be half of one person, right? That's doing other things too. They don't understand that. That's something that TPP in this case would do. And so in summary, this new connective age that we live in, it is not waiting for the rules to catch up. This connected world is fine going without rules, right? There's a danger to that, but it certainly is at a pace they're not going to wait. And time is extremely urgent. Another thing that no longer applies in this world is the way we've always done things. In fact, at UPS, I start to cringe when I hear the way we've always done things, because we haven't always done things like that, right? Because we were a messenger company, we were this or that, we were constantly changing. And as businesses, we just can't afford. It's okay to have pride in the past, but you can't let that restrict the future. And we really believe, I really believe, that it's an important time that we live in, that we've got to embrace the future. We've got to take these opportunities. And we must have global rulemaking that does align with these realities that we're facing. So with that being said, thank you very much for your attention, and I'm wide open to taking your questions. So thank you. And I don't know how they do that here, but I didn't plant any questions. So you won't see UPSers raising their hands. Yes? Okay. I'm sure they'll get you one. Here. She's coming.
Thank you for your remarks today. They were excellent. I'm Maura Banta. I happen to work for IBM, and we're all in TPP with you. I've spent some time in DC talking to the Massachusetts delegation about TPP, and on the far left, they are afraid of job loss and environment. On the right, they're saying something should happen, but won't happen with this Congress. My real fear is that nothing's going to happen, and then it's going to roll into the next administration, that Hillary Clinton will not be able to do anything because of NAFTA and the afterglow of that. So we're talking about potentially 6 or 7 years before we get this right, and I guess I wonder if UPS has any magic that IBM hasn't thought about to move it along.
I don't know that I'd call it magic, but I think slight optimism. How is that? We do believe that there is a window. Now, I don't know if the window is big enough to drive a truck through it, or if it's so small that you're not going to be able to get the smallest thing through it. But there are enough members of Congress that in the past have supported this, that we think it is still a slight possibility this year. Now, it would have to be in the lame duck session. There's no doubt about that. And I am not at all predicting that this is going to happen. I'm saying we think there's a slight chance that it could. We believe that there are certain Democrats that have consistently voted for trade, that a lot of them would hold. And we also believe that there's a lot of Republicans that in the past, a bit greater percentage, have supported trade. And even though they're presidential candidates on either party, it's not supporting this, we think it's a possibility. If it doesn't happen, then we're going to have to see when the new president comes in. Obviously, if you base it on how they've been campaigning and how they feel today, you would say there's next to no chance that they would address it. But all of us, when we step into a new job, we sometimes find out that reality is a little different than what we thought when we were going into the job. There was a few times I questioned UPS CEOs. I understand a little better now what some of their thinking was. So I'm not going to say that people may not adjust their views too. I'm not trying to say they're flip-flopping, because we all have to look at present situations and we have to decide what's appropriate for now. So I wouldn't say that I'm much more optimistic than you are, but I do believe there's small opportunities, and we should find those opportunities and see if we can make it happen. And appreciate your support of your company too. Okay?
David,
Yes.
You talked about how you started off as a messenger company with people on foot, bicycle, you moved to trucks, now you have airplanes. What would you say is the potential use of the newest technological development, which is drones, in affecting your business?
Okay. You know, you have kept the streak going. I have not had a talk with any group since I've been the CEO that somebody didn't want to talk about drones. I think it started the Sunday after Thanksgiving, about 2.5 years ago, a little 60-minute segment. But we do believe that drones have capabilities. In fact, we just announced a joint effort to where in Rwanda, we are teaming up with a drone company and with Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance. And this is in a part of the world where 70% of the roads get washed out, right? And you just have no access. And so we are right now going to start a partnership with these two other organizations and make sure that we get these vaccines delivered using drones. And we've got various other tests. We have them in some of our buildings, and we're doing some things, checking out the technology. What I don't believe is that there's going to be 10 or 20,000 of these flying over Metro Boston, delivering dog food and toothbrushes and those things. I just don't believe the economics of that work out. I do believe, especially when you talk about biogenetics and things that can have very short lives, extremely urgent, maybe things that are very valuable, in rural places especially, I think there's going to be a use for drones. And we will plan to be right in the middle of that. I just don't think it's going to be widespread like some people seem to think. When I say widespread, just replacing all other forms of delivery. Okay. Here's one right here. To your right.
Along a similar vein, what are your thoughts on self-driving vehicles, trucks and other vehicles?
Right. Well, you know, every day when I get in my car in Georgia 400 traffic in Atlanta, I believe that everybody other than me should have these autonomous vehicles. Because I just don't think they know how to drive, you know? And they probably have the same thoughts about me. But again, we believe the technology is there. And we're working with some companies. We've invested in some companies to get learnings from this. And we're interested in a lot of different technologies. And one of which would be maybe you would have a lead vehicle, and I'm talking tractor trailers or anything. You could have a lead vehicle, and then you have vehicles that follow, and wouldn't necessarily have to have a driver. Maybe that at some point in time, and I don't think too far down the future, we could have drivers that would meet the vehicle, or drivers that are in the cars, but they may not be driving, but be available if they're needed to. So I just think it's a matter of time. It's going to create a lot of opportunities. We see a lot of opportunities in certain parts of our business, but we also have to remember there are a lot of social issues to get through here. And if all cars automatically were autonomous, it'd be a little bit different than you have some autonomous, then you have a lot of not so careful drivers that are out there too. So we believe it's an area that's going to make a lot of progress in the next few years. But until policy again catches up with some of this, there's always going to be the pull about safety and those kinds of issues. Okay, there's one in the back here to your left. There you go.
Thank you very much for coming under the auspices of Boston College and all, and the future of the company as you describe it. What would you advise a young person entering college today to major in? Should they be technologists? Should they be liberal arts majors? What is it? What kind of person is it who's going to survive all the changes that you just predicted over the next 30 years?
Right. You know, and I do speak to a lot of colleges, and I love it, right? Because if there's one group that'll keep you on your toes, these young students that feel like they're going to conquer the world, and many of them will. But the best advice I give them is to follow their heart. You know, life is just too short to study something because you think there's a great opportunity there. That you need to see, what are you really interested in? What do you have a passion for? There's too many people going through their lives without that passion. And really encourage them to chase their passion. Also encourage them, though, don't have blinders on, right? You wouldn't necessarily want to follow paths that are going to be disintermediated at some point. And so, yeah, you do need to look at future trends and then find something that you're very interested in that does appear to have a future and will create those opportunities. The other things I tell them is be flexible. Be willing to do what you're asked to do. Don't wait for someone to hand you opportunity. You make your opportunities. And I was giving this to a group of executive MBAs, very sharp group, and they wanted to know my story, so I told them my story. At the end, one of the students raises their hand and says, well, for those of us who are not willing to make those sacrifices and do what you did, how can we get your job? That's exactly, Karen, the way I reacted. I thought it was a joke. It was not a joke. And the answer I gave him wasn't a joke either, because I said, if you're not willing to do those things, then you just better hope that none of your peers are willing to do so. Because someday you could be my age and you could wonder why you never got your opportunity. Now, I didn't get a standing ovation on that answer. But I thought it was one people needed to hear. Any others? We have a few.
There seems to be an increasing frequency of extreme weather, internationally. I have to believe it has an impact on your business. Can you discuss how you're addressing it, both in the short term but also longer term?
Right, and I don't know if the weather is more extreme it could be or if our knowledge of it is just so much better, but it does seem like there's something going on throughout the world. And the best thing that we can do is we have meteorologists that do a pretty good job of predicting. And so the focus of our logistics experts is to go around those kind of weather events. And so if it's a ground shipment, if we know that we can go in across the country, if we can drop lower into the country and then come back up and avoid it, we do that. If it's a hurricane or something that you can predict, we sure get our assets, especially I said assets, right? I forget the southern accent, gets me in trouble sometimes. We get our assets out of there and avoid those areas. Boy, this is a tough crowd here. I'll hear from our PR people about that little joke, right? But so we do try to avoid. We also try to be ready that as soon as those events clear up, that we have things in place. So it takes a lot of pre-work, and then it takes a lot of reaction. But and we talked about this last night. One of the effects that we've seen, and I'll leave out part of it, and Niraj, the part I'll leave out. Well, one effect we've seen is when you have these weather events and people get stranded, e-commerce shipments go off the wall. They have nothing else to do, right? So they order and they order and they order. Niraj likes that quite a bit. He might like it a little more than I do at times, but it does take a lot of planning, and we don't always get it 100% right, but we get it right more than we get it wrong. Yes?
I'm starting to see a white van show up in my driveway with the logo of another Seattle-founded company on the back. Is Amazon your customer or your competitor today?
Well, you just kept the second streak going. Besides drones, I always get asked about Amazon. Amazon's a big customer of ours, and they're a good customer, and they're responsive when we go to them, like many of our customers are, like these guys are here. But obviously, just like with any large concern, you watch the moves that they make. They're always going to do what's best for them. We're going to do what's best for us. Where we look is for those points where we share commonality, and it works to the benefit of both. When that's the case, and it is the majority of the case, we're going to be a customer-vendor relationship, or really partners in the supply chain. When that ceases to be the case, if it ever does, whether it's Amazon or any other customer, then they're going to respond the way they need to, and we would do the same thing. So, but good customer of ours is the way I would relate it. Any others? One more is what the guy in charge just said.
What are the more obscure emerging markets? You mentioned large ones.
That's right.
Things like that, Vietnam. What are the more obscure markets that we may not hear as much about?
And there's so many of them, but I'll just try to give a few examples. We really believe that in Africa, especially the four corners of Africa, that there's such potential. I mean, the labor arbitrage alone, not only the resources, but the labor arbitrage alone is going to open up some big, big opportunities. You always think of South Africa, but Morocco has got a lot of potential. Nigeria could be another one. It's just that got to make sure that the countries can be stable enough to take advantage of those. In Central America, we believe there's several of those countries. Obviously, you can think of Panama and Colombia, but in some of these cases, they have very good workforces. Excuse me, and we believe there's opportunities there. And then you can do the same thing when you get to Central Europe, especially the closer you get to Russia, some of those Baltic countries. But a lot of it just does depend on the stabilized governments in some of those areas. But there will be cities that's as big as Boston in 20 years that many Americans wouldn't even be aware of today. And those are where a lot of the opportunities are going to be. Well, I don't know about you, but I can feel the heat that tells me it's time for me to get off the stage. But thank you very much. I enjoyed this. Thank you.